You have just subscribed to Planning Motion Travel Planning app, and before you start planning your first trip, you want to know how to use Planning Motion? Well, you are at the right place. We are going to tour the app together, looking at a trip that has been prepared with Planning Motion. Then, in a second video of this Getting Started Guide series, we'll build a trip from scratch. And in the last video, which is very short but very useful, I'll tell you about 2 browser settings for both your computer and your tablet that are essential for Planning Motion to work properly. The trips we're going to look at together are not the one-off methods, nor are they the only possible ways of planning. They are trips to demonstrate what can be done with Planning Motion and the different planning tools available. You will probably agree with me, there is no one way to plan trips. It depends on the type of the trip you're taking, how long you are going, who you're going with. It depends on a lot of things. What's really great about Planning Motion is that you can see your trip in several different ways. If you go to the calendar, you can see all the stages of the trip. I can click here to also see the stops between 2 stages, the accommodations, activities, and transportation I've planned. There's this month view, but there's also a list view. I can choose to see everything I've planned or just the activities or accommodations, for example. If I want to change the dates of a stage, I can simply move it in the calendar. The same goes for an accommodation or an activity. It's really easy to make changes to your planning. You also have the option to click on Map, select Google Maps, and you'll find all the stages added to the trip. Click on Create Map. You can select up to 25 stages at a time, which is still 15 stages more than if you go directly to Google Maps without Planning Motion, because Google Maps limits you to 10 stages at a time. If your trip has more than 25 stages, simply uncheck any of the stages in the list to get the itinerary with 25 stages or less. Click on View My Itinerary, and all the addresses entered in Planning Motion are transferred to Google Maps in just one click. The itinerary is mapped out, and you have access to all the usual features of Google Maps, such as clicking on details. As usual, you have the mileage and estimated travel time between each of the stages. You can also send what you've prepared in Planning Motion to mapping applications such as Maps.me, Google My Maps, or a Garmin GPS. We've made a video, which is on Planning Motion's YouTube channel, that shows all these possibilities. You can also view all your expenses on a single page. They are grouped by expense type, a total for accommodations, here for activities. At the top of the page, you'll see the total amount for all the expenses you've entered, converted into the currency of your choice. If you are from the United States and you want to see all your travel expenses converted into US dollars, you change here for USD, and voila, all expenses are displayed converted at the current USD rate. Currency conversion is calculated at the daily rate. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball, so it's impossible to know the exchange rate at the time of your trip or the amount you'll have on your credit card, including conversion fees. But it gives you an idea, an approximation of the daily rate. Let's take a look at the expenses page of a trip prepared for a cruise in South America. Here, we have the reservation of a taxi to take us back to the hotel after the cruise. The price is set to Argentine pesos in the list of expenses because Canadian dollars is selected here at the top of the page. All expenses are converted into Canadian dollars. So an amount in Argentine pesos is entered here, but it's automatically displayed in Canadian dollars on the expense page. I'm going to take a moment to show you another tool that I really like, one that is very useful. When I booked this taxi, I was told that it had to be paid for in cash, that credit cards would not be accepted. So, in such cases, you check here payable in cash. Then, if you go to the top menu and click on currencies, the total of expenses payable in cash are grouped by currency and converted at the daily rate into US dollars because US dollars is selected here. But as for the expense page, you can choose any other currency. So this is useful to know how much local currency in cash you'll need when you get to the destination. We'll now take a look at what I call the basic tools that are available to build a trip, such as adding stages, accommodation, and activities. You can add two types of stages to a trip. Stages with overnight stays, where you plan to stop for at least one night and possibly do some activities. You can add accommodation to this stage, keeping note of the website, address, and contact details. If you wish, you can also add your reservations. You can also enter the services that will be available there. In addition to accommodations, you can also add activities to a stage and note down everything you want. There is also another type of stages called stops. There are stages with the small flag. A stop can be used in many different ways. It can be used to plan a stop between two stages to do an activity, for example, or to add a port of call for a cruise. It can also be used to make a detour on the road to take a scenic route instead of the highway, for example. So, to plan a trip, you have stages, stop, accommodation, and activities. There's also the transport. You can add tickets for a plane, train, bus, ferries, whatever the means of transport. Like here, there's a plane ticket to Chile. For this ticket, we have added the 4 flight segments, 2 of which are for transportation from Boston to Houston, then Houston to Santiago, Chile, and the other 2 for the return flights. You can also add vehicle rentals, transfer, and parking. When you plan a road trip, whether using your own vehicle or renting one, by entering stages, you've already seen that you get your itinerary and mileage on Google Maps. But when it comes to recording gas and toll expenses in Planning Motion, by clicking on Travel Kit, you can use the Transportation Costs section to add these expenses. In fact, you can add all the other useful information for your trip in the Travel Kit. There are different categories, and in each one, as with other Planning Motion tools, there is a note and comments section. As with all other tools, you can format the information as you like, add clickable links, add lists, and even make your own checklists. Everything we've seen so far is related to planning a specific trip, but sometimes, while surfing the web, flipping through a book, or talking to a friend, we come across interesting information for a future trip, and we want to keep it, write it down, and what we really want is to be able to find it again when we need it. With Planning Motion's notebook, you can do exactly that. That is, keep a note of this information and, above all, find it again easily when you need it. In fact, anything you can add to a trip, you can also add to Planning Motion's notebook. Here, in the left-hand column, you can access the notebook by clicking on Notebook. All notes are grouped by stage, stops, accommodation, activities, and if you want to find something in particular, here at the top right is the search field. I type, for example, Las Vegas, and everything that has been noted and contains Las Vegas will be displayed. There are lots of planning possibilities with the notebook. We have made a video specifically about the notebook, and like all other Planning Motion tutorials, it's on the YouTube channel. You'll be able to see in details how to use the notebook and learn some of our tips for easily finding what we've noted in the notebook. In the next video of this series on getting started with Planning Motion, we're going to build a trip from scratch, looking at how to actually create stages and add accommodations. But first, I'd like to show you a few more tools for planning your trips. It often happens to me, especially when I plan a trip a long time in advance, that over a period of time, I spend a lot of time preparing my trip, and then I can go weeks or even months without getting back to it. So, if you're like me, when we come back, we often can't remember where we are in our research, what remains to be prepared. It's in these cases that a tool called the planning status is very useful for keeping track of your trip planning, and it saves a lot of time. This planning status section for accommodations and activities can be found in several places in Planning Motion. By default, everything is in preparation. If you don't need this tool to plan a trip, you simply leave everything in preparation and just leave it at that. On the other hand, if you do decide to use it, by keeping the planning status up to date, selecting Ready for Booking, as for this accommodation, if you go to the planning page here, you'll have a list of all the planning statuses. If you click on Ready for Booking, you'll obviously find what you've selected as Ready for Booking. If you click on Booked, you will see at a glance what is booked. The same applies to each of the planning statuses. And if you need to modify a booking, like for this one, for example, you update the planning status to modify. You do this for everything you want to modify, and then you'll find only those you've selected as to modify here in this section to modify. This can be very useful when you decide to change the dates of a trip after you have already started to make reservations. And when you do have to change the dates of a trip, there's also the date change tool, which can be very interesting and makes these changes very easy to handle. We'll see how this date change tool works in the second video of the Getting Started guide, where we'll look at how to create a trip with Planning Motion. I want you to know that a lot of Planning Motion users tell me that in no time at all, they become familiar with the tools and find it very easy to navigate from one place to another in the app. Here, at the top of the page, you'll find a menu and buttons that can be accessed no matter which page of the trip you're on. So you're never lost. You can always click on one of these buttons to add or modify things to your trip, to move from one page to another, to view your itinerary on the calendar, on a map, on your expense page, or by planning status. There is also the left-hand column of the app, which is always there and which you can close if you like. In this column, you can directly create a new trip. You can also access the notebook. Just below, there is the list of the trips you've created, which you can click to access directly. Clicking on the Manage button brings up the list of all trips, where you can change information such as names and dates. At the bottom of the left-hand column, you can add links to websites. You can add websites that you often use when you're preparing trips so that you can access them directly from Planning Motion, all in one place. Also, at the top of the page, you have access to your account to change your password, your profile, view your subscription details, and also some default settings you can add. We have seen that you can transfer your planning from Planning Motion to mobile applications such as Google Maps and Maps.me, but there's another way of having your information at your fingertips when you're traveling, by creating your travel book. For all your trips, By clicking here on Travel Book, you can obtain a PDF file containing all the information from your trip. You can save it locally on your phone or your tablet to access your information during your trip, even if you don't have access to internet. And with the PDF search tool, the magnifying glass, you can go straight to the page that you want to see without having to scroll through all the pages. Now that we have covered the main planning tools, it's time to get down to the real thing: planning a trip with Planning Motion. In the following video, we will plan together a trip from scratch.